When the sun sets and the busy streets begin to quiet down, it's a time to unwind, to relax, throw on some Netflix, spend quality time with your loved ones, and get a good night's rest to recharge your batteries for the day ahead. For some, however, the setting sun brings with it something much more sinister, a feeling of dread plagued with only one thought, endlessly repeating itself inside their minds. Will I see it again? In this episode of Shadow Encounters, we'll hear stories of individuals that have been plagued with a nightly visit their entire lives. The renter of a small apartment in Texas has an unwelcome guest to pay him a visit, and a couple of eerily similar stories regarding frightening encounters with malicious red-eyed shadows. All of that and more on Shadow Encounters. Number 1. While I was growing up, I lived in a house that was 40 years old. The entire time I lived in that house, the only good nights of sleep I had were when I was spending the night at a friend or a relative's house, or the year or so I spent sleeping in my grandmother's bedroom with her. Every night, after everyone had gone to bed, I would wake up to see a man-shaped shadow standing in front of my closet door. This was regardless of whether the door was open or not. The only visual description I can give of the man was that he was just darker than the space around him. I felt that he was evil and watching me. Every night when this would occur, I would summon the courage to jump out of my bed and the psychological safety of my blankets and run down the hall to my parents' bedroom, where I would jump into their bed claiming nightmares. I was a very reticent child, and it never occurred to me to actually tell my parents what was going on, but this might have been because my parents are both engineers and probably would have sent me straight to a shrink instead of consoling me. One night when I was 7, the same thing happened as usual, but when I ran to my parents' bedroom, I found the door locked. I screamed and banged at the door for possibly as long as an hour while watching the shadow watch me from my open doorway. Eventually it left and I passed out there on the floor. I found out in the morning that my parents had decided, without bothering to inform me of it, that I was too old to be sleeping in their bed and that they were going to keep their door locked nightly. With me unable to leave the room, the shadow man began getting more active. Rather than simply standing in the corner of the room, he would slowly advance towards me, sometimes standing at the foot of the bed, sometimes sitting on the foot of the bed, sometimes coming right up next to me and staring down at me, and at least twice rising up into the air from the foot of the bed and hovering directly over me, a foot or two from the ceiling. He never touched me, but always seemed malevolent. Later that year, I converted to Christianity, was baptized, and began to pray fervently to God and Jesus every night that the man would go away. It did nothing. I tried telling him to go away in a firm voice, and also this did nothing. The only other place in the house I ever felt uneasy was in the bathtub, which was directly on the other side of the wall from my closet. When I was 10 or 11, I asked my parents if anyone had ever died in the house. They said the realtor had mentioned an old man dying in the bathtub, but hadn't much cared because they didn't believe in ghosts. While it would make sense to believe the shadow man was the same as the old man who died in the bathtub, I never got the sense that the shadow man was elderly or, in fact, human in any way. It did not seem like a thing that had ever lived. It felt ageless and as though it had never experienced any emotion other than hostility. My family moved the summer before I started 7th grade, and I never saw it again. My life calmed down a lot in the supernatural sense until I was 16. I was having a very difficult teenage experience, particularly with my parents, and spent most of my nights at friends' houses, which my parents did not mind in the least. One night I was sitting outside my best friend's house with her while she smoked a cigarette and bitched about government oppression and other typical teenage topics. Suddenly we heard a noise behind us and turned to see the small cement sewer cover fly upward and sewage spill. This was about 3 feet behind us, and we ran into the middle of the street to get away from the possibility of being covered in whatever was coming out of that hole. We agreed it was weird and went back inside. A while later, Myself and my friend both looked at the front door simultaneously. I said something to the effect of, "Someone's at the door." Now my friend got up to look at the people, but she said she couldn't see anyone. Both of us still felt someone was there. So we went to look at the entry from the kitchen window. What I saw was a column of swirling blackness, the same type of blackness of which the shadow man of my childhood was made. I turned to look at my friend. Her face was blank and she said, "It's a demon." This statement I attribute to a combination of her Romanian upbringing and the intense feeling of evil emanating from this thing. Many times the intensity of the shadow man, who seemed friendlier in comparison. My friend then grabbed a big box of salt in the pantry and walked around the house arm in arm with me while she poured salt under every door and window. She told me Romanians do this to keep evil from crossing through them. I guess evil can't come in through a wall? Anyhow, I guess it worked because the thing just stayed in the entryway all night. We stayed up all night too, just because falling asleep seemed like it might be the wrong thing to do. The thing disappeared at dawn, at which point my friend charged outside for a much-needed cigarette, and I walked home. Suddenly, home seemed safer than where I was, despite everything. For a year and a half after that, everywhere I went, sewer and water-type things exploded, often right before I arrived at any given location. Many faucets and sprinklers were repaired around me, and even one water main. But that was the last I saw of shadows. I feel it may be important to mention that I've seen a lot of ghosts, and they have always seemed just like people to me, until I looked at them and they vanished after a second. They've never given me any feelings of terror or dread, though sometimes they are a little startling. Like the time I was going to the bathroom at a friend's house 2 years ago and looked up to see some man in the doorway watching me pee. I asked my friend if he had ghosts, and he said he had a bunch, but that judging from the part of the house I'd come from, I had just encountered one of the several male ghosts who liked to watch women while they were naked or using the restroom. He said that he could never keep a female roommate because of them. I then asked his current female roommate if she'd had any ghost encounters, to which she replied that she knew she looked good naked, but she thought it was rude for them to look. In short, no ghost I've ever encountered has ever had the slightest resemblance to a shadow creature. I know that many other people believe them to be the same, but I know they are not. Number 2. A few times I've relayed this story to close trusted friends and family members about an experience I had 17 years ago. No one knew what to make of it, and they all said they never encountered such a thing as I had. Only after reading similar stories did I feel relieved about what happened to me. I'm a bit shocked to see how common these visits are, although with my Catholic upbringing, I've always been aware that a spirit world exists, both good and evil. At the time, I had just rented an apartment in Houston, Texas, and was living alone. As my room was small, my bed was positioned with the long side flat against the wall. Every night I slept with my back against the wall. Except for the faint glow of a faraway street light, my room was pretty dark. I recall being awakened out of a deep sleep by a strange feeling of uneasiness. I opened my eyes to find a short, dark figure standing up against my bed directly opposite of me. This figure was blacker than the darkness of my room, and it was in silhouette. It stood there, staring very intently at me. I could not make out any facial features or eyes, and the outline looked like someone draped in a sheet. It was short, maybe about 4 feet tall. The intense energy of this being was very frightful, and I did not have a good feeling about it. I laid there for a time feeling somewhat paralyzed, and all the while this figure continued to look at me. Suddenly I reached up and turned for the light, and the figure disappeared. I know this was not a dream because I recall distinctly being awakened from my sleep. I know now that what awakened me was the intense energy and presence of this shadow person. It seemed like it stood there watching me sleep almost out of curiosity. I've never encountered it again and hope not to. It's not the kind of thing you want coming around for a visit. I've made sure many times to say the very powerful prayer to Saint Michael, the Archangel, for protection. I would suggest that to anyone having these kinds of strange encounters to please do the same. He is very powerful in protecting us against the forces of darkness. Trust me, it works. Number 3. I have been seeing ghosts since I was 6 years old, and interacting with them since I was 13. Some were docile, some were nasty, but my most recent was unlike the others I have encountered. I moved into my husband's house after we got married, and I noticed that I had 5 ghosts living with me. A little boy who plays with my son's toys, an old woman who watches TV with me, a cat in my kitchen, young woman who lingers by the door, and a large black dog on my porch. I was fine with these as they did not interfere with my goings-on in the house. The cat keeps me company when I cook, the dog when I garden, and the old lady when I watch TV. The little boy and the young woman stick to themselves, but sometimes they stay in a room with me. After about 6 months, I was reading a book and something caught my eye. I thought it was the little boy or the old woman walking in the hallway, so I turned my head to acknowledge them, and to my surprise and fear, it was a very large man, about 6 foot tall, standing in my hallway. He leaned on the doorway and stood there staring at me. He was solid black with red eyes. I was very unnerved and pretended to ignore him because I did not get a docile feeling from him at all. He stood there for about a half hour, never moving, just staring. I was not going to get up until he went away. Finally, he turned and walked off into my son's room. Now, maternal instincts took over and I ran in there, but nothing was there. A few days later, my son started having horrible nightmares, waking up screaming. To this day, he will not sleep in his room without his dog in there with him. During Christmas, I was having some awful dreams and I woke up terrified. I sat straight up in bed and he was standing at the edge of my bed. His eyes were brighter red this time. I sat there staring at him. I was hoping he wasn't real until he started to move. I hunched down and I tried to sleep, but I couldn't because he would not leave. The next night it was the same, except he was standing on my side of the bed. I tried to wake my husband up, but he would not wake. I spent another terrified night with this man staring at me. By the third night, I did not want to sleep, but I had to get up early. I had the same nightmares and woke up. This time the man was sitting on the edge of my bed and he leaned down so his face was 2 inches from mine. All I could see was the bright red eyes and his body blocking out the light from the living room. I was so scared I had a hard time breathing. He leaned even closer and told me,
"If you tell him, I will bite out your tongue. If you yell, I will bite out your tongue."
I kept my mouth shut. I've never had a ghost threaten me like that before. I leaned back and squeezed my eyes shut. After a while, I felt his presence leave my room. Now, he stands in my hallway, lounging by my bedroom door, and he lingers all night long. I have to walk right next to him to get into my bedroom. Every once in a while, I wake up and he is standing next to or at the end of my bed. I go back to sleep, hoping that this will be the last night I see him, but part of me knows it won't be. Number 4. It was 1977, I think. My dad had just remarried and now I suddenly had a big brother and a little sister. We moved into their house. It was a rough beginning for me. I made up a lot of stuff to cause trouble in the house, so I wasn't taken very seriously. One night, my cousins were staying the night with my little sister and myself. Brian, my male cousin, and I were sleeping in one room and the girls stayed in the other. It was late one night and we decided to go get a snack. A sunken living room separated us from the kitchen. We walked across the living room toward the kitchen and stopped. in fear as we noticed that there was a dark shape standing in the entrance to the kitchen. It appeared to be hooded, or else it had a pointed head. There were 2 red dots where the eyes should have been. We didn't turn on the light in the living room, so we were in total darkness. The shadow person appeared to be even darker than the shadows. Terrified, we ran back to my bedroom and into my sister's room. She and my cousin were still awake also. We asked if they wanted to see something really scary. They gave us mixed answers, but were still willing to come see what we were talking about. We went back into the living room, and sure enough, the dark shape was still there waiting for us. My sister began to cry, and my little cousin just held her hand to her mouth. It was obvious that they both saw the shadow person, but were too frightened to talk. We took off running back down the bedrooms, crying and screaming. My parents woke up and asked what was going on. My sister and little cousin wouldn't talk about it, but I told them there was something standing in the kitchen. My dad went to check for signs of someone breaking in, but all the doors were still locked. The front door had a locked bolt, as did the back sliding door. The only other door was from the kitchen into the garage, and there was no sign that someone had opened the garage door. All the windows were closed and locked as well. My parents said that they didn't believe that we had seen a ghost, but we moved from that house shortly after this incident. To this day, when I ask my sister if she remembers seeing the man with the red eyes, she puts her hand up and walks away, saying, "I don't want to talk about it." Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to episode 4 of Shadow Encounters. Wanted to just give a little bit of a backstory. That first story on this episode was kind of hit home a little bit for me, and that's why I really wanted to include it into this video. I had a similar experience where I used to run to my parents' bedroom almost nightly out of fear for the things that I was seeing. And one day, you go running down the hallway and check the door and it's locked. And that is hands down the freakiest thing that could possibly happen to you as a child. And so when I read that, I'm like, fuck, I know that feeling so well. But anyway, I also wanted to share with you guys that episode 5 is going to be a little bit of a treat. I am going to write up one of my experiences that happened probably about 3 years ago now, where I had my apartment possessed for about a month with one particular shadow person, and it was all because of a woman that I was interested in. So if that piques your curiosity, then stay tuned, and that'll be up soon. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, post your comments, whatever. That would be it would be awesome. I would appreciate it so much. I'm trying to get a bigger following for this channel, but it is a lot of work. But it is also fun to do, so I'm going to keep at it, and I hope you guys enjoy, and have a nice week ahead of yourselves, and we'll talk soon.